let's move on to subject number 2, which is the maze. So, is it viable to run a maze dungeon or a maze puzzle in Dungeons and Dragons? Have you or would you run one? If so, how would you or how did you do it? And as a player, how would you successfully navigate that maze? And I'm going to put Denny on the spot. We're going to go counterclockwise this time. So, Denny, let us know about mazes. I know you said you've had this answer prepped at least a week in advance, so I'm excited to see what you had ready for us.
Wow, way to throw me under the bus like that. Totally, yeah. Week and a
Better
half.
be amazing or else. We know
Um,
you prepped.
Yeah, my answer is no. Mazes aren't viable. Pass. No, just kidding. No, I think mazes are totally viable in D&D. I mean, it's hard to when you say like, can you do a maze in D&D? Like, I think everybody will instinctually go, yeah, of course. I mean, mazes and fantasy, that just fits together so well. And even if it isn't viable, everybody's going to try it at some point. I think when it comes to mazes, we have to consider like what their purpose is. You know, like people are meant to get lost in them. Maybe they're a way to waste time in a time-sensitive situation for the party, or they're a place to entrap a monster, as is often associated with the Minotaur legends from Greek myth. Or it's just a way to test a party's ability to navigate and survive in a confusing space. I haven't used that many mazes in my games, but the one time I did, it was more of a fun, like, low-stakes situation. It was part of a contest. I had some contestants go up against one of the players who was interested in participating in this basically magical corn maze, so to say. And yeah, basically it was a race to the middle. They had to do skill checks along the way, navigation, stealth to avoid like guards who would like tag them out and teleport them back to the entrance, so they kind of lost some time, evading some non-hazardous traps, and eventually when they got to the middle, there were a few items that they would have to make an intelligence check to determine like, what is the item I'm supposed to make based on this clue that I gave them, and then race out with that item. And it was fun because not only was it dealing with the hazards of the maze itself, but then also dealing with each other, and if they ran into each other, trying to mess each other up or, you know, hinder the contest in some sort of way. And whoever got out with the item first, I gave them a wand of magic detection. Not a superb item, but that's how low stakes the situation was. And it was just a fun way to let off some steam. As a player, I had a DM, and I don't think this is terribly uncommon because this kind of goes back to roots of D&D, but they would describe like where we were going in this dungeon that was maze-like, and describe, you know, veering paths to the left and right. And myself and the other players of that campaign, we each had just a piece of paper and be like, all right, let's try and draw this thing out as he's describing it. And it was a lot of fun to go through this dungeon and then at the end compare our drawings to see how accurately everybody had the same mental image. And I think including a drawing element is very important in a higher stakes situation, you know, so that way you know where you've gone, or like where a better possible route might be. Yeah, so that's kind of my experience with mazes. I think they're useful.
I like the drawing aspect. That takes me back to like really old school AD&D where we would always have to have somebody map it. And so having, you know, whether it's a maze or not, if you're in a dungeon or whatnot, you always had one person that was drawing the map. And it was always fun after the game was over to compare the DM's map to the map that the players drew. So really cool. I also like the aspect of a competition in a maze. That's really neat as well. How about Bear? What's the Bear Bard have for us with regards to mazes?
So, by the way, I really like that last one, especially the competition. That's really cool. So I've always wanted to I like really commit to doing a maze. I haven't had the chance. You know, little ones, like, you know, more like puzzles as opposed. You know, I've just never been willing to, like, I just haven't taken the time to set up like Foundry, because I mainly play online, to really go through and you know, because you have to hide all the edges with the lighting and stuff like that. So I think doing it digitally, you have a lot of options with these virtual tabletops to do some really cool things with, you know, especially with lighting and all that. It's just taking the time to set it up, especially Foundry, where it's got a lot of tools, but it doesn't hold your hand. So it takes a long time to get through and do it. I have, however, wanted to set up a campaign, and I've kind of like put some pieces together. Very similar, based off the 1986 classic The Labyrinth, starring David Bowie's Bulge and David Bowie. Jennifer Connelly was somewhere in there as well. But I think that'd be super fun. So the whole, your whole campaign, and so you'd have to make this giant overmap, and really let them go through the whole thing like that. And so, because I feel like you could either do that linearly or really just you choose what area you go to, and there's no pre-planned staging it. You really just have to plan the whole thing out and let them go where they go, and then just solve all the riddles and puzzles. And if they get it wrong, you throw enemies at them. And I think that something like that would be a lot of fun, especially playing the Goblin King or an adjacent character. I think would be a ton of fun.
All right, fantastic. Kevin from D&D Homebrew, what's your thoughts on mazes?
I definitely think mazes are great. They're part of D&D. They're part of mythology. They're caverns. We used to run mazes, and as you were talking about, we used to always have paper and pencil, which actually made, because you had cartography skills. The 5-foot or 10-foot corridor goes this way and that. It wasn't as difficult as if you're in a garden maze and you're just wandering around, unless you're making little markers or things to try to figure out, did we already come here or go there? Whereas when you're mapping or on a virtual tabletop, once you've gone through an area, you can see back behind you, you'll realize we're in a maze, But again, the thing about the maze is, as I think Dicey was talking about, someone's put you there. Someone's testing you. Someone has gone through all this effort to make this elaborate, stonework or whatever, and put things in it. And I always think of the insane wizard or some powerful entity that's testing your abilities, or the old Star Trek, I put 1,000 more Quatloos on the newcomers, the thing where they put you into this maze and then you're struggling your way out, and then all the dead ends would have something in them. And the other thing, I think the maze gives you an opportunity, if you've had someone that's put all this effort into creating this elaborate maze and all the work into it, you can also put all sorts of elaborate traps and puzzles, and some of the things that sometimes we think, well, why would this be here? I know Wally in his book has things with constructs. I think of a casino, right, with the and that kind of thing. If you're in a maze that someone's set up and you come across it, you realize this whoever's made this, we got to figure this out. We got to figure that out. And then also you can have teleport you here. In the way old days, they used to have sliding walls and teleport things where you get totally lost, right? In a maze, that's of course part of the thing, right? And it's a natural thing to have to go to different areas, especially if you're like teleported in, where you're in there and there's no exits. You've got to find this and you got to find that. It isn't so hokey or whatever. It isn't contrived because someone created this maze in order to test you or in order to pitch you against others for their own diabolical amusement, right? So I think and again, it's not that difficult if like a virtual, because you're just going to just keep winding around. If you do total, I love the thing Dicey was talking about where they just did it on paper and just told you sort of randomly, because we always had somebody, I played for many years with a guy that loved to map. So he was there just mapping everything out. And so to think about that, if you said to the players, you literally just have to figure this out as best you can type thing, adds that extra element. Because as I said, it's a contest. It's terrifying. You're trapped there. You're going around corners, and again, all the dead ends in a maze I would construct for D&D would have a chamber at the end with something in it, something waiting. And then, of course, the center of the maze. That's what you're trying to get to. That's where the gate is. That's the big puzzle, the big monster. So I totally, I love mazes. I did a video on them, constructing one, just taking one off the internet, because I think there's something that you can really mine as a set piece, that some of the things that don't make sense sometimes in D&D make perfect sense.
I'm glad that you mentioned the shifting walls and the things where the maze shifts around. So like a maze is hard enough, especially if you pick the wrong direction every time and there's monster encounters. So you're probably getting low on hit points and resources and things of that nature. But then to just be like, I'm just going to totally mess with you. Then you have shifting walls and secret doors and rotating rooms. And that's like taking it to the next level. That's some severe punishment you can dish out.
Right, and that, in the way olden days, the Gygaxian thing of just punishing people
Yeah.
just for his own amusement or whatever, right? And sometimes people would say, "Really, you put me here?" But they figured their way out eventually, And defeating a maze is, it's if the harder it is, the funner it is to defeat it.
That's true. Very good. I like it.
You know what shifting maze reminds me of?
Uh-oh.
What?
The 1986 classic, The Labyrinth, starring David Bowie.
What about you, Mr. Welch? What do you have for us on mazes?
Well, for me, mazes are like special guest stars. You don't want to use them too often. And they're one of the few things that have aged badly in the age of digital, because you don't want your players to figure out exactly where everything is. And if you're doing a digital maze, then it's mapping it out for them. And that takes away a lot of the special stuff you can do with mazes, like when you walk into the circular room and you can hear everything around it rotate, and then suddenly they don't know which direction the doors are facing, or when they're teleported into an identical corridor facing a different direction. That's also one of my favorites. So you want to use them, because they're just basically super complicated dungeons, and they have their purposes, but they're a pain in the neck to fill to make. You don't want to just throw out engineering and you're like, okay, here, go left, go right, go here. You want to throw out some loops or some tricks to confuse the characters. The characters have to figure out that they've been walking down this corridor, I don't know, 50, 60 miles now. It hasn't changed much, but they can still see that door, because every time they walk 30 feet, they're teleported back 30 feet. You have all of these, you have all these things you can use it, but if you want to make them map it out old school, that's the best way you can do a maze, because they have to rely on their own talents. Or in the case of the dwarf, he just pulls out the mining tools, pulls up his britches, pulls down his goggles, and say, it's time to make Dad proud. And then the maze is reduced to a single straight line. Like we're in a maze. No, we're not. We're in a straight line with stuff in the way.
Friction, we were in a maze.
You may be in the maze. I know which way I'm going.
That makes me think, like, how scary would it be if the players, well, of course, we don't often give our players the ability to drill through walls, but what if there was a monster in the maze that could? Like the Umber Hulk
comes through. Yeah, exactly.
Or a thorn, purple worm, earth elemental, boule, come up from the ground, trappers, cloakers. Ooh. Yeah, just about everything else. Giant rolling balls down the corridor for no apparent reason.
How about you, Juice? What do you have for us? Maze.
So maybe I have an unpopular opinion. Our maze is fun. And in my opinion, I say no. The issue is you have a few different ways to look at it. If it's sitting there with your graph paper and mapping it out, it has nothing to do with character ability. It's all players, just like puzzles, right? It comes down to player knowledge, how a player's brain works, not a character's brain. Now, that doesn't mean you can't run mazes in a fun way or in a way that revolves around what the characters can do. But I don't think, like Mr. Welch, no offense, I just disagree with his theory on it. It's the old school way, right? I've played old school. I played AD&D. That was my first D&D. And I remember I suck at drawing out the maze, first of all. Second of all, I think waiting for the person to map it out while everyone else sits there eating their popcorn for the 5 minutes, making sure they got the dimensions right, is not fun. I'm somebody who needs things to go quick. Maybe I have ADHD. I don't know. And so I guess when it comes down to it, when you're talking about maybe even modern tools and stuff, I think what you can do, and I've done this, I did this in my Descent into Avernus campaign, I left some things up to dice rolls. You don't have to do that. You can still leave it up to, say it's a puzzle and they come up to a corridor and there's a cat to the right and a dog to the left. Which way do you go? And maybe there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, but one way is a certain encounter. The other way might be free, like there is no encounter. And so you pretend they've gotten lost, and you can narrate them getting lost in a maze and things like that. Now, Mr. Welch did bring up some really cool things like teleporting into a different corridor that looks similar. Stuff like that is kind of cool. But I find getting lost in a maze in that way doesn't work as well for me and my play style. So bringing it back, you throw that extra encounter at them because they chose this rather than that. And maybe it's like, okay, they have up to 5 things they can do wrong, or they do this, and it's 5 encounters you've prepared. But maybe they only have to do 3 to get out of the maze. Once they've done all 5, that's it. You just narrate the rest and let them get out or whatever. And you can, ask them, hey, you got lost. What do you think your character's thinking? Put the narrative on them. In our Descent into Avernus campaign, though, again, spoilers, the Bramblewood in Avernus is one of the encounters. There's multiple ways into it. It's like a thorny forest that's too dense to, really just go wherever you want. I let my players see the map, and I left it to a die roll. And when they failed the die roll, it led to an encounter. That encounter then, made things harder. Unfortunately, instead of getting all 4 encounters, they only had to do 1, so they ended up getting to the end and whatever. However, later on, they had to come back, and I made them make the same rolls. I also, when they had to leave it, I made them have to find their way out. So, there's little ways you can do it, but for me, I think it needs to be quick, because again, when you start getting lost and there aren't necessarily encounters planned or whatever, and they've already been to this spot, I think it just drags the campaign, the session on, and there's not any progress in the story, not any progress in the dungeon. I love dungeons. I love dungeon crawls, but I find when players are not making progress, that's when they stack dice. That's when they're not paying attention. That's when they're on their phone. That's when they're, talking to the person next to them. And so I think when it comes to mazes, it's a slippery slope. So I guess that's my take on it.
Oh, that's a good take. Again, not everyone plays D&D the same, which is definitely good. And either some things like mazes are either going to work or they're not, or like I believe Mr. Welch said, it's just a once in a while thing just to see how it goes. Or a lot of people don't even like dungeons. They don't like dungeon crawls and stuff. So I'm glad that you brought that take to the table, because I did want to get a variety of opinions, and that is a very good one. So
now I do want to make it very clear, Mr. Welch, if you ever ran a maze for me, I would love to play in that, because it sounds like you have some amazing ways to do it that I have not experienced. Just want to throw that out there. And I will not play a dwarf because I don't want it on easy mode.
Oh no! Go steal the original maze from Keep on the Borderlands. I mean, that's the basic. That's the one people need to get started.
I've actually played Keep on the Borderlands like 4 times. So, yeah. And I also have Temple of Elemental Evil. Like I've got stuff like that.
What about you, Fred? What do you have for us on mazes?
So for me, mazes are actually pretty much instrumental to Dungeons and Dragons, because they are a mixture of puzzle and exploration. But the thing that I think is problematic for a maze as a puzzle in a game is when they are a magic maze, because they are by far the most painful for a dungeon master to adjudicate. They're very complicated. They eliminate a lot of the laws of physics that we understand in the real world, and so suddenly you can have walls that move, but then you can wind up teleporting to different locations. The rules for a magic maze may change. I know this because in the Rise of Tiamat there's a magic maze, and it's brutal. Unless you actually know the answer, it's often almost impossible to deal with. Unless, of course, it's a trial and error sort of thing where it doesn't reset the whole thing and you have to start all over again. So there is a chance to actually figure it out over time. I think as a player, I always found magic mazes really, really difficult. Now, that being said, I think that your standard maze is actually your dungeon. And my understanding is that Gary Gygax and even Dave Arneson modeled a lot of their dungeons. This is why the dungeons look quite odd in terms of their construction on being a maze. They're not necessarily designed for to be a living space. They are designed to keep people out of places. So they're designed for whoever has constructed them. They understand how they work. They're designed a particular way, and they can navigate them, but everybody else needs to sod off, and that's why they're constructed that way. So we actually probably use mazes more often than people realize in our games, which means we're actually running puzzles, because a dungeon is a puzzle. It's just a different type of puzzle. It's a lot of exploration. And the thing that you can incorporate into a maze dungeon is dead ends. Why is there a dead end? I've done a video. Why is there a dead end? Is it collapse? Was it never finished? Is there actually, do you have to smash down the wall to find the secret compartment behind it, or the continuation? It got blocked off because there's something way too dangerous there, or somebody didn't want anybody to find something in particular. There's no secret door. Like, you have to smash that section down. So it opens up a lot of things that mean that those players who are really sort of invested in exploring their environment will find those sorts of things in a maze-like dungeon. But you can also, and this has already been said, you can include combats in a maze dungeon. You can include traps. There's a lot of exploration, but it also means that if you explore a dungeon maze, there is usually treasure to be found. You just have to look in the right place. It's rewarding, that exploration aspect. Not so much that figuring out a puzzle aspect. It's more the exploration aspect of it. And then, look, you can't have Dungeons and Dragons and have a Minotaur and not have a maze. I mean, really? You're going to have a Minotaur in your game and there's no maze? I don't think so. So for me, I think they're actually used more often than people realize. They just don't accept that they have actually included a maze in their game. And when I say dungeon, like, even a castle can be a dungeon and maze-like in many respects. And a lot of you have already brought up that sort of aspect. Now, for those of you who are unsure, that you don't have to agree with me, but I think they are a viable part of exploration. Now, to solve a standard maze, for those of you who are unaware, and there'll be a few people here who know the answer to this. So if you're a player and you're playing in a maze and it's not a magic maze and there's no teleportation things, no moving walls, there's no funny business going on, it's just your standard sort of maze. It follows the natural law that we understand. A long piece of string. I would take a lot of string, infinite string. Like, you want a ball of magic string. Like, magic string is like the best thing for a maze. Like, you tie it off when you're at one point and you go, and if you get lost, you can at least find your way back to the original point. Chalk. There's a reason why we take chalk. Like, chalk, you chalk off, this is where I've been. You put an arrow to indicate this is the way you were coming, and then you pray that you're not in the maze that what was her name? Jennifer Connelly was in Labyrinth, where the little sods used to move all the plates around so all the marks didn't sort of point in the right direction as you're going. Like, just pray. And if you see them doing that, kill them. Kill them all. Okay? Chalk. Now, there's one other thing, and I know it works. I was taught to get out of a maze that's a standard maze, not magic, that you follow one wall. You either pick the left wall to follow or the right wall to follow. And if you do that, you can get out of that maze. No problems. Works every single time. I didn't believe them until I went out with my girlfriend and one of her friends, and we went to a maze. So this is a real maze in the real world, not in a fantasy world. And they grew all this maze. Like, it's like corn, isn't it? Cornfield. And they just chop out this maze. So we went in, and we're in there, and we're like, do you know how to get out? How do we get out? And they're like, I think there was at the beginning of the maze, there was actually like a little plaque or something. There was a little box with, I think the solution was in there. Did anybody take the solution? No, I didn't take the solution. Did you take the solution? No. We had no solution with us. We were stuck. We were lost. And then suddenly I was like, You know, when I was playing Dungeons and Dragons, they told me that if I follow one wall the whole way through, yeah, we can get out. Like if we follow the left wall or right wall, just pick one and stay with it, we'll get out. 2.5 hours later, and we made it out. Okay, because if we hadn't have done that, we would have never made it out. Okay, and I had two very grateful women that day, and I was. This is the only time that I've ever gone out with a woman and they were impressed that I had played Dungeons and Dragons. Okay? That's the only time that I can think of. So that's my story.
I have a couple things to ask you, Fred. The first thing is, would you think that it's viable if we did like the standard maze, that we could put a crypt thing in there? Could we put a crypt thing in the maze? Would that
Dude, I already did a video. I already did a live stream of the
you
crypt
did.
thing. Of course we can put one in there. You know this. You know this.
The crypt thing, for those not familiar, it's main to, it guards something, and it's main, and we can have it at the end of the maze where they get all the way to the end, and then there's a crypt thing, and its ability is to defend, and it teleports people to other places, so it will teleport you in all different places in the maze. I think it'd be funny. No, really good explanation of mazes and stuff. And you kind of touched on a few things that I was going to mention as well, is that it depends on your definitions of mazes, but I am 100% agreement that a dungeon can be a maze. And in fact, that's one of the things that I can go ahead and scratch off my notes, that if you are exploring a dungeon and you get to a dead end that doesn't help progress you towards your final goal or objective, then you've hit a dead end of a maze, in my opinion. So you go all this way and you're like, well, okay, it looks like we found the bathroom, but oh, we must have went the wrong way. We got to backtrack and go the other way. So that very much or very well could be maze. Now, there's a lot of other bullet points I have on here as well, but most of you have already discussed those, and it's been a great discussion so far. So I do want to kind of include something that is different for me. So I have my own theories and my own definitions of mazes. I use my definitions very loosely. And one of my favorite mazes is from The Legend of Zelda. And I call it a maze because they called it a maze. And if you've played the original Legend of Zelda, there's one section that you go into that if you don't go in the correct direction, it puts you back to the beginning. So there's actually a sequence. You have to go north, and then you have to go east, you have to go south, you have to go east, and then you have to go north. If you don't do that, then you go to the beginning, and you're probably going to have combat with some monsters. So I have created like 3 or 4 of these. One of them is on my channel, the very first one, in which I imitated the Legend of Zelda and called it the Maze of Elements. Now, you don't want to just let them go in, and if they pick the wrong direction, then it's combat. You want to give clues for these types of mazes. So prior to that, they found a room, and they're in with a pillar of fire, and the only way to go is north. And then they're in a room, they're in with a pond of water, the only way to go is east. They're in with a mound of dirt, the only way they can go is south. So if they remember that key, then they can't, when they actually get to the maze and they see fire, then they can go north, because that's what they did before. And so giving them the key in advance is what I like to do with those. Now, my favorite maze that I did this way is in my book. Again, shameless plug on the Journal of Puzzle Encounters, but it's called the Goldfish Maze. Now, you don't need the key to get through it. That you can take it, I believe it branches off in 3 different paths 3 different times. So it is an underground water system, and you can make it to the end point enough to get your breath of water and then go back in, except for one point, which doesn't work that way. Now, when you go through, there's different colors of schools of fish. So when you first jump in, there's goldfish and there's green fish. And depending on which school you follow, one of the schools are going to the left, the other schools are going to go to the right. And depending on which ones you follow, you're either going to run into some types of hazards, or you're going to get a clean, safe path. Now, I put the key in the ranger cabin before they go down in there. So if they take some time to explore, they're going to find a goldfish tank that is filled with algae and all kinds of stuff. They clean the goldfish tank, they're going to see that there's some goldfish in there. So they clean it out, they put the goldfish back, and if they observe them for about 10 minutes, they're going to see that each one swims in a different way, except for the green one. He's floating. So don't follow the green goldfish. But they can sit there and they can watch these goldfish. They can watch the red one getting chased by the blue one. They can see the gray one won't come out of the castle. So these all have different meanings. So when they see these goldfish in the goldfish maze, if they follow the red goldfish, well, then all of a sudden these giant blue ones are going to be behind them and chasing them. Now we have a chase sequence. If they follow the gray ones, then they're going to find the treasure in a hidden castle that's underwater. And there's also a journal that they can explore. And inside that journal, it talks about a fisherman that liked to use nets to catch these fish that were a brown color. Now, if they follow the brown fish and they go in that direction, then they're going to be captured by giants that have nets, and they're out catching swimmers that come by. So if you watch and if you take a little bit of time, you clean out the fish tank, you observe it, you can note down what all these different fish are doing, and then when you go into the maze, you've got the key in your head to go through. And those are just, again, it's not your I guess it's not your textbook definition of a maze where you've got, these corridors that you go up and down, you get lost, you go to dead ends, you have monster encounters. But it is, I do classify it as such because whoever made The Legend of Zelda did, and that was a huge inspiration for me as far as creating obstacle course types mazes.
I actually like that a lot, the fish one. That's really creative. It's like because the more they look into it, the easier time they're gonna have. You should put that in a book or something.
That's a great idea. I'll do it with some acronyms and stuff. I'll put fish in capital letters.
If you really want to mess with them, you put a note at the end of the maze from the guy who commissioned the maze saying, "Larry, I said build this thing by the according to the blueprints and lay off the sauce."
There's actually 4 things, so I'll be really quick about it.
Okay.
I just realised Castle Ravenloft was designed to be a maze. It was supposed to be chaotic and very difficult to navigate through to represent the mind of Strahd. So for those of you who are into The Curse of Strahd or Ravenloft, the original adventure, then, that's actually a maze, that location. So, yeah, I just thought, right, there you go. Now, one of the things that I always thought was entertaining is that during The Curse of Strahd, they actually have a model of the castle in the Amber Temple. Spoilers, too late. Okay, I already said it. So basically, yeah, I don't care. So there's actually a model of Castle Ravenloft that players can find so they can figure out how to navigate it. So, which means that if you're in a maze-like dungeon or a maze of any kind, it would actually make sense there may be a copy of that maze in a key location. So if you find the secret door that gets into the main control center or the main location where the creator is, they will have a solution, because sometimes they've been drinking too much and they forget how to get in and out, and so they have to have the solution there so they remind themselves rather than just using muscle memory. Another way for dealing with mazes, a lot of time we're dealing with Dungeons and Dragons, so teleportation spells will often, if you can't find your way into the center or into a particular place and you've had enough, teleport. You go, you leave, you get to a certain level, you get dimension door and teleport. And the other thing for those people, and this used to be done by many people who acquired a decanter of endless water, but also used spells that created a lot of water, or would divert a river or the ocean or something towards a underground dungeon or dungeon-like maze, is they would flood it so that everything died in there, and then once they'd flooded it, hopefully all the good stuff that was light would float back out, and they'd just collect it all up and leave. Okay, and then of course all the dead monsters would float out too. You didn't have to worry about killing anything. So it was like, yeah, well done, Dungeon Master. You made a very impressive dungeon there, the underground there, but we flooded it, and everything's now dead, and we're just going to take all this shit. Thank you.
So those are our thoughts on mazes. Be sure to leave a comment below. Have you participated in a maze before as a player? Have you run one as a DM? Let us know with a comment below, and don't forget to check out all of my YouTube friends' channels. All of the links are in the description below.